Today we're making outdoor folding chairs so we can fully enjoy the sun without leaving home. This project can be done by anyone with just a handful of tools, so let's get started! I built this project using rough pine beams I had in storage to avoid going out purchasing new wood, but you can totally skip all these initial steps and purchase ready-to-use wood from the lumber store. If you can, I would recommend you using a wood that is more suitable for outdoors, like cedar for example. This Nordic pine that I used was not ideal, but still works. What might happen is that the chair won't last as many years in good shape as a cedar chair would. So I started by cutting the beams right at the center because large boards that are cut closer to the center of the tree will always have a tendency to cup. By cutting them, some pressure will be released and the wood becomes more stable. Then I cut them in half lengthwise because it will be easier to joint and flatten small stock. I went ahead making these cuts super fast and easily on the bandsaw. The cut is being made slightly rounded as the piece doesn't fit properly, but it doesn't really matter because there is more than enough wood. I'm now going to use my new benchtop joiner to flatten and square up two faces. It is a pretty small machine, but does a really nice work. Once I got two adjacent faces nice and square, I can feed them to the thickness planer so it can chew up a bunch of shavings, making the remaining two sides perfectly flat and parallel to the first two. These are ready to be sliced in 3 at the bandsaw. Since I ended up with pieces in the center with 2 rough sawn faces, I had to join one face before throwing it at the thickness planer. I planed them all into 2 thicknesses, 27mm for the leg and arm structure and 22mm for the seat and back panels. I was making 2 chairs, so this is why you see these many boards. Now that our wood is in good shape, ready to be used, we can finally start the build. To help you out, I made a template that you can download for free and print at home. I'll have the link in the description below. I never built a chair before, so I really felt I needed to do some research first. This design was inspired by a chair that I found during my online research and made it grow a pair of armrests for a more comfortable lounging experience. Once the template was put together and cut, I could start laying out the pieces over the wood. Make sure to avoid as many knots and cracks as possible because those are weak points in the wood and you don't want your chair to break when you sit on it. It's also a good idea to keep all parts identified until they are assembled. Here are all the pieces needed for 2 chairs. You can cut them in several ways depending on the tools that you have available. If you don't have access to stationary power tools, do not fear as you can still make it happen with a simple jigsaw or circular saw. But keep in mind that some cuts should be done before others. For example, if you decide to cut along this line first, this whole part will fall off and then it will be harder to hold a smaller piece to finish the cuts. You will need a few clamps to keep your wood from moving around and take your time following the outer side of the line. Even a handsaw will work if you have some practice with it. If you have bigger tools like a table saw or a bandsaw, things will go a lot quicker. As I was doing 2 chairs, I needed to work faster and ended up using the bandsaw to cut the remaining pieces. Regardless of the saw you are using, the blade should always be touching the other side of the line. With all the trapezoidal pieces cut, it's time to refine the shapes and make them as straight as we can, keeping the template size and angles. If you have a sander, this might be a lot easier, but a board with coarse sandpaper spray glued to it can work well. Also, you get to shake that body and move those sleepy muscles. Alright, so now I'm going to work on the seats and backs, and I need to glue the boards in pairs to make them wider. So after deciding which one goes with which, I will close them like a book and place the edges to be glued facing up on the workbench vise. I have a video covering the entire process of making this workbench and installing this awesome rockler vise that you can check up there. So the trick here is to plane the 2 edges together as one. This way they will always match perfectly. No matter if you plane them at 90 degrees, 89 or 76, they will always match. Once they are flat, I make a couple passes at the front and back, making slight ramps. This will create small gaps at the front and back, leaving a higher point in the middle, and the purpose is to simplify the clamping procedure. If you have a small amount of clamps, this will be perfect because now you only need clamps at the ends, as the central portion of the board will be already forced together. Make sure you use wood glue that is meant for exterior use. You can apply a little more glue than I did here, although it worked perfectly, but you know you have enough glue when a small amount squeezes out along the joint. I can now trim them to final size and sand them smooth. To make sure all seats and all backs were the same length in pairs, I clamped the scrap piece to the table saw fans to work as a stop block. The seats must be shorter by double the thickness of your leg and arm structure. In this case, the leg and arm structure is 27 mm thick, which means that the seating panels will be 54 mm shorter than the backing ones. To join the parts together, we'll be using dowels, and Rockler has very good doweling jig kits. They are super easy to use and reliable every time, so the alignment of your work pieces always comes up right. I will leave some links in the description for products I use in this video in case you're interested. Okay, but if you live in a country where you can't find this jig, let's see how you can make one. You just need some scraps of wood, and if you use a hardwood, it will work best. Then you attach 2 scrap pieces together that you know having a perfect 90-degree angle on one side. Get a wood drill bit that has the same diameter of your dowels and drill a hole into the hardwood scrap, doing your best to keep the bit flush against the reference corner. If you have a drill press, things are a lot easier. You will need to attach another piece of wood that can be thinner and drill a large hole right where it meets the center line of the little block. You can use a piece of clear acrylic instead if you happen to have some. We will use this reference line to bump against the pencil marks on our chair pieces to drill the holes for the dowels in the perfect spot. So these are the parts needed for each side of the chair, and we need to make some marks on specific measurements that will be pointed out on the template. This is where the smaller pieces will meet and keep both side assemblies similar to each other. After figuring out the layout for the dowels, you can go ahead and trace line segments that are perpendicular to the meeting edges. So we can grab our jig, match the pencil line, secure it in place, and drill. I put a little bit of green masking tape on the drill bit to create a visual depth stop. The Rockler doweling jig already comes with a stop collar to keep the drilling depth consistent every time. After checking for fit, we can start gluing the parts together. Please note that the glue will take some space and might difficult the assembly when things get too tight, so you can always enlarge the holes just slightly or sand the dowels just a little bit. You will need a couple of clamps to make sure the pieces are firmly pressed together. We will repeat the procedure for the legs assembly, and it might be a good idea to use a longer and thicker dowel to create extra strength, since your body weight will be forcing this joint. To clamp such an open angle, I quickly cut 2 clamping blocks that I also included in the template in case you need them. These will assist in closing the gap. When the glue is dry, I scraped off the glue squeeze outs and sanded everything smooth with a palm sander. Now it's time to grab the template pieces and mark the place to drill a few holes. I started by drilling larger holes to later plug with some dowel rod and have all the screw heads hidden. This is totally optional, although I think it will look a lot better without the screw heads visible along the entire chair. A couple of these holes will be drilled all the way through, matching the diameter of your Chicago bolts. This is where the pieces will pivot when folding the chair. Now it is a good time to refine some areas and give them a final sanding. Here we have the components for the chair. 2 leg assemblies, 2 side assemblies, 2 sitting boards, and 2 backing boards. You'll also need a support piece where the seat will rest upon that I forgot to show at this point. If you don't have a workbench vise, this might be the time to reach out for a helper to hold the pieces securely while you drive in the screws. The gap between the boards doesn't have any particular size, it's up to you. I just used a scrap piece and made that dimension consistent for all the gaps. Once you have both parts assembled, it's time to connect them with Chicago bolts or sex bolts and a stainless steel threaded rod. You can easily cut the rod to size with a hacksaw and thread it into the nuts. We still need to attach the support piece, and you can call for your helper again or use your portable drill like I did here. All you need is to find the perfect spot where the feet sit flat against the floor and trace a line on the inside of the front legs. Now you know where to place the support piece, at what angle, and can now drive the screws. We can finally fill in the screw holes with wood plugs, making everything nice and flush. It's probably a good idea to round over some sharp corners, and it's ready to receive the finish. It's easier if you separate the two parts again. Make sure you use something durable and meant for exterior use, and follow the recommendations written on the label. I hope you enjoy this project and hope that this brings you motivation to build your own chair. As you can see, having just a small amount of tools doesn't prevent you from achieving good and functional results. In most cases, the difference is the building time. It might take you longer to build one of these chairs with a jigsaw, sand and drill them by hand, but the final product can be just as good as making it with big power tools. There's really no excuse to not getting started in building stuff with your own hands, and there are several products like the doweling jig from Rockler, for example, that allows you to create strong, reliable joints for a very low price. Take this lockdown period to be with your own self or with your family, making something that matters. Big thanks to Rockler and all my Patreon members for supporting this project. If you want to support my work, head over to my online store and grab a t-shirt or a notebook and visit my Patreon page. Thanks everyone for watching, keep safe and go get your hands dirty. Até já!